Hello and welcome to Sustainability Live London. We're having a great time today and we hope you are too, for those who are watching via Umbrella and those who are watching the virtual stage at the venue. We hope you're enjoying it. I'm excited for today's session. Next up, we have Carl Ennis, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Siemens PLC. A short bio about Carl. He has been in the power industry for more than 35 years. He is an engineer first with a real passion for the breadth of discipline. Having started his career as an apprentice, he is a keen advocate of the skills and diversity agendas, recognizing the need for new and diverse thinking in ever-changing markets. He has worked for Siemens for over 20 years, having been responsible for a number of Siemens businesses in the UK and Asia Pacific. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Carl to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Emily, and that's very kind introduction. So yes, my name's Carl Ennis, and as Emily mentioned, I'm the Chief Executive here at Siemens PLC. And the race to net zero is on. Now, whilst headline-grabbing statements like that one are really quite powerful, what's really far more important are the headline-grabbing investments that the UK has made over the last decades in major renewable projects, putting UK PLC at the forefront and the centre of that race to net zero, and taking us as a country a step further away from our reliance on fossil fuels. But as concentrated large-scale generation accounts for only 30% of UK emissions, this alone clearly isn't enough. Transforming the balance, in fact, the majority of our CO2 emissions in transport, in heat, and in buildings will certainly fit into the difficult box. Sometimes less headline-worthy, but they are perhaps even more important to achieving net zero. And decarbonisation in this arena is a challenge that affects cities, towns, transport networks, the energy grid, our use of data, how we manufacture our products, and indeed how we even build our buildings. Now, as engineers, we've been taught that when a problem is complex, a route to a solution is to divide and conquer, to simplify the problem, to eat the adage of the elephant, to eat that a slice at a time. So in this context, let's first look at transport, then let's have a look at what we would do with heat, and finally, perhaps we should look at buildings. Now, clearly, whilst that simplified approach to decarbonisation is an option, it's certainly not one that will lead to an efficient solution. Eating that elephant a slice at a time will end up being a very painful process and a very costly one. Now, smart solutions that are often what are required at community level require an intelligent systems-led approach, not only to the technology solution, but to the commercial model that's used, one that can actually support a just transition, making sure that a fair burden is carried by those who are able to, but doesn't leave those less able to afford it behind. And also, perhaps that's where the real opportunity to start the levelling up agenda comes in. Now, of course, if this were easy, we'd already be doing it, and it's not easy. And there are a wealth, unfortunately, of barriers to creating those better, smarter, cleaner infrastructure. And somewhat disappointingly for the head of a technology company, I'm sad to say that in this particular instance, the challenge is not a technological one. We today have with us already proven technology that will get us 80% of the way to net zero. Today's challenge is, in fact, a commercial one. It's one struggling with the complex decision-making that happens at community level, at town level. And sometimes it's one that's desperately in need of a burning platform to drive change. But perhaps I would proffer that we are in a time of unprecedented challenge and change for a business, for people, and for society as a whole. I think we have a burning platform. And let's just think about just in the last 2 years? Well, we've had COVID. We've had supply chain issues that started with a poorly executed 3-point turn in the Suez Canal, but went way beyond there. We had the official withdrawal of the UK from Europe. We've had COVID. We had a shift from employees who were wanting increased flexibility in how they went about their work to them needing to that flexibility to be able to perform their work. We've had the increased volatility in energy pricing and more latterly that really showing itself in driving inflation. We've had COVID. We've had a war in the Ukraine that's making us question the more than 50-year-old perceived wisdom of what a resilient supply chain should look like. And of course, just one look at the recent weather patterns in the UK is enough to remind us that actually the climate challenge remains with us. It remains a real problem, not a future theoretical one anymore, but a real here and now problem that's actually impacting our daily lives. And that is only the last 2 years. It was Winston Churchill who said that never let a good crisis go to waste. And so that's why I truly believe that in this time of crisis, now is really the time to act. I'd like to debunk another myth and be really clear about this, that there is a cost of doing nothing. If we stick to our 2050 target for decarbonisation, kicking the net zero can down the road by a decade whilst holding that 2050 target will roughly, the estimate is, double our cost to net zero. More likely, not only will it just double the cost, it actually might prevent us getting there, certainly by 2050, perhaps ever by at all sticking to the 1.5 or 2 degree target. And if we do kick it down the can, let's not kid ourselves, we're leaving that challenge to somebody else's, to somebody else, the next generation, our children's generation, and perhaps their children's generation. And I would question whether or not that feels right. And it certainly doesn't feel right to me. Now, as a technology company, Siemens often takes on the role of being there to help our clients navigate their challenges and come up with some solutions to often problems that may well, on the first glance, seem insurmountable. But we've also, of late, starting to learn how to navel gaze a little bit, how to drink our own champagne, to use our own technology to shift the way that we work. And you might say, well, what does that look like in real terms? Well, I could talk to you about the deployment of some of our green tech in a 1940s industrial facility in the northeast, which is driving that facility to net zero. And that's really a really important challenge for us because, of course, net zero isn't just about the greenfield sites, it's about our brownfield sites, it's about our real estate that exists today across our domestic, commercial and industrial portfolio. Some beautiful buildings, we're simply not going to knock them down in order to get them to net zero and contribute to the goals of net zero. So being able to show what we're able to do with our existing portfolio is really important. I can also talk to you about the deployment of our digital twin technology in our variable speed drive competence centre just south of Manchester. And there, the adoption of that technology has supported the drive for production efficiencies over multiple decades that's consistently put that facility amongst the most productive facilities in the global Siemens portfolio. We can make products cost effectively in the UK if we deploy technology and we drive for efficiencies. And they've managed to do that in that facility whilst also reducing their carbon footprint by, amongst other things, supporting a local local community hydro scheme with a private wire and mitigating themselves in the bargain to some of the effects of volatile energy markets. I could also describe to you the extra human effort our team went to, along with other partners, to build a manufacturing facility, first in the virtual world and then in the real world, for the assembly of ventilators, to take Penlon's manufacturing capacity from only 7 ventilators a week up to 1,000 ventilators a week, and all in just 100 days, and done right at the beginning of the pandemic, when what people perceived to be the biggest challenge was going to be able to ventilate the cases that we had. So again, a really great example of digital to drive productivity. A couple of weeks ago, we in Siemens launched our accelerator. Now, this is our newly launched digital business platform that combines portfolio, and that's a mixture of digitally enabled hardware and cloud-enabled software, along with an ecosystem that brings together partners, developers, integrators, collaborators, and all with a marketplace to support transaction in that space. And it's all built on a really strong technical and commercial governance layer. And we're really excited about this opportunity, and the fact that this will open up opportunities for not only our customers, but our partners. Because if there's one thing that we've really learned in Siemens over the last 2 years, it's understanding the difference between what we can do well, but what others can do better. And collaboration has become absolutely fundamental to our view of how we drive together forward in challenging times. Now, at the same time, we also were working with Make UK and launched a report with them, reviewing the progress of decarbonisation amongst UK manufacturers, large and small. Now, some of the stats make for positive reading. So the one that stands out for me was that 96% of organisations now understand the importance and the need to decarbonise. But there are also some less positive statistics in the report. One that particularly stands out is that even though 96% know that they need to do something, only 46% are actually taking actions now. Now, many of those not taking actions are small and medium enterprises. And I believe it's the rest of industry's responsibility to help those organisations take the first step. Sometimes that elephant can seem mighty large when you're confronted with it, and knowing which bit to chop off first to eat can be very difficult. Now, Accelerator, the platform that I mentioned earlier, is Siemens' effort to do just that, to work with those small and medium enterprises and collaborators. It's a curated space of like-minded organisations that are already on the journey and that are willing to share their experience. Of course, there is another option to decarbonise. We could simply outsource the problem, outsource particularly all our perhaps energy-intensive operations. Now, those tend to also be defined as our foundational industries, and they're so called because without them, we would build very little else. It's our glass industry, our cement industry, our metals industry. And those industries together are worth over £52 billion annually to the UK economy. We could outsource that to far-flung corners of the world. But I truly hope that our experience over these last months and couple of years have taught us that actually, indeed, that would be a very, very short-sighted strategy and lead us to perhaps even further problems in the future. Indeed, as the chair of Net Zero Northwest, which I'm honoured to pick up as an additional role, I lead a group of energy-intensive industries who are companies who are cross-sector and they're cross-sector based in the Northwest, and who are committed to taking their operations, those foundational industry operations, to net zero. And they believe, and I believe, that working together, sharing our experiences and speaking with a coordinated voice to government not only strengthens the awareness of the need for these foundational industries to remain local, to remain in the Northwest and around the UK, but also to show the potential that these foundational industries have for them to offer local, high-quality jobs for generations to come. Perhaps a very apt definition for those looking for one, for what levelling up perhaps should really look like. And finally, and in spite of all of the self-inflicted wounds happening in the government at the moment, the government still has an important role to play in enabling net zero. Setting a clear plan and allowing that plan to be the basis of the creation of long-term stable policy and some seed funding to create those markets. I believe that's what government is there to do. It's perhaps its sole and most important role in the term of industry. If that activity is done well, and the example that's often stated of that is the offshore wind environment, and as Siemens, we were very proud to be heavily involved in that process from the beginning, building our turbine blades in the Hull facility and creating more than 1,000 jobs, which has gone on to expand further over the course of the last few years. And when it's done well there, it really does attract private funding. Most of the funding that is currently financing our offshore wind sector is not government funding. It's actually private funding who see the returns over the long term and are happy to invest in those returns. It builds those high quality local jobs that can ignite the economy around it, and we've seen that firsthand in the whole region, where that drive has not only just built the local direct jobs in our facility, but it's ignited the supply chain in the region, the support facilities in the region, the educational activities in the region as feeder inputs to the renewable sector. So we know that we can do this. We know that when done properly, it generates the right returns. But perhaps what we're seeing firsthand now, what happens sometimes in some other parts of the country where it's not done well, and where there is that lack of uncertainty, where there is that lack of stability, and that can actually numb many parts of the industry, numb the economy, because we're rabbits staring into the headlights, not quite knowing which direction those headlights are going to go, and people, perhaps industries, are standing waiting. I would suggest that whilst we're waiting, there is a real chance that we're going to get run over by that car that's rushing at us. And so now, absolutely, and most definitely, is the time for us to act and win the race to net zero. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carl. That was a fantastic presentation, incredibly fascinating. And we actually have a few questions now that I'm excited to jump into. There was a lot of fun stats that you kind of shared with us, and I picked up on one, the 46% that weren't kind of taking the lead on decarbonisation tend to be SMEs. And I was interested, let's kind of pretend that I'm a small business. I'm thinking that my problem is that I can't afford this current situation. I don't know how to help towards it, and there's obviously rising costs, as you mentioned. So where is this money coming from, and how will I be able to access it?
So first of all, I would say, just reiterate the importance of small business. As a large business, some people look at us and say, well, it's all right, you're a large business. Yeah, but actually my supply chain is made up of thousands of small and medium enterprises, and long may that be the case, providing expert capabilities and local jobs. But it's also important that to decarbonise as a nation, it's not just the big boys who have to decarbonise, it's everybody in the supply chain has to decarbonise. And we did what's classed as our scope 3 emissions. We did an analysis on that, and roughly over somewhere between 90 and 95% of our overall emissions are in our scope 3 in that supply chain. So that's the scale of the task. So to ignore the small and medium organizations would be folly. To the point of how do you create? Yes, there are a lot of challenges on cost. We see that absolutely, and they're real. They're absolute pain points for many suppliers. The experience I have of working with our supply chain is actually, even though it may feel that now is not the right time to invest and drive your operations, exactly now is. And I know that the cost of energy is really causing a lot of pain points, but because the cost of energy is so expensive now, it brings more into focus the benefit of efficiencies. So if we're able to drive out inefficient processes by using either smarter deployment of your production technology or smarter deployment of your heating and energy systems, that's where the benefit comes from. So what we actually find when we're working with our customers is often that these investments to decarbonize can be self-funding. You have to take a slightly longer term view, and we've worked with some of our customers with our financing arm to help them with the financing. But those opportunities those examples are really there. I'd mentioned the business platform we have, the accelerator, and I would really encourage people, if anybody's interested, to reach out to me, and we can link them up with that to share those experiences, because it is possible. It is somewhat daunting. And this is not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not about turning upside down everything that you're doing and starting again from scratch. It can be a journey, but every journey starts with the first few steps. Okay, and I think there is no quick win. But if we stop and do nothing, we are just delaying the inevitable, because we are going to have to go on that journey.
Mm. Yeah, and as you mentioned, obviously this is a nationwide matter. We can leave it up to the big companies, but you mentioned obviously England and the UK have had a lot of challenges thrown at them the past couple of years, and the government has had a part to play in that, especially with the support of COVID and things like that. So I'm kind of wanting to throw the question at you: should the government come out of more help when it comes to kind of the sustainability matters, decarbonisation, and especially the fact we had COP last year, which obviously I think kind of brought a lot of attention to this matter. So what is the government's part to play in this?
Yeah, so yes, they have a role. I was lucky to spend a little bit of time at COP last year and present and have some discussions at the event. And actually, for me, I mentioned to others that when I walked away from it, it was the first time I'd been in a group like that where it became obvious that it was less a conversation around should we and more about how do we. And so that for me was brilliant, that we'd sort of got to that stage. I have to say that progress since then has been somewhat glacial, shall we say, but these are really big, hairy topics, and if anybody thinks there's a quick win to it, it's just not real. So I think governments do have a play. When you start to talk about governments, everybody thinks then, oh, that's industry asking for a handout. Actually, generally speaking, we're not. What government can do is create stability. Right. So as a business leader, I might not like the rules that government set, but I can tell you, and I speak to many, many businesses up and down the UK, and we're an inventive lot of businesses in the UK. And given a set of rules, we will work out how to make good business out of it. Right. And we will drive forward. So I'm not even worried about what the rules are, but set some rules and stick to them, because what business can't deal with is it can't deal with variability easily. So once we set off down a route, we're going to go down that route, and we need to have some level of confidence that the rules are going to stay stable whilst I'm plodding my way down that route. And what we've seen in the UK over the last few years is flip-flopping. The decisions made on one type of support or infrastructure or funding or taxation, and then a change in that to the next direction. And that's where it's really difficult. And we've made very little progress in, we talk about the domestic housing stock and how poorly, and we've had various attempts to try and do that, and nothing has really made progress because we keep changing the rules. And the other example where the rules have remained pretty stable is offshore wind. And we've seen significant progress. And, we're now government are backing that horse from 10 gigawatts up to 40 gigawatts. And I believe that's a really important step. But it's not the only step. And we need to take that idea of how to build markets, which is what government should do, stable markets, and then create those environments. And yes, there is a bit of government funding that's required to do that, but it's peanuts in the scale of things. And it can, the offshore wind market is, as attractive, huge investment, often from overseas pension funds. So that's not funded by government, but they set the criteria that allowed that market to be built and attract that investment. And that's what we now need to see in other areas at scale. And I think it's possible, but I think government have to have a plan. They have to have a plan and stick to it. And that's been a little bit lacking of late.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is a lot of our conversation today is based around, funding, investments, access to capital. How can the government support in that sense? And there might be an assumption that, costs tend to go down over time. So, should we sit on our eggs and wait and see if things get cheaper and then, and then shoot for net zero in the future? Or is this a now this needs to happen sort of situation?
So, and it's true. I mean, anybody who's worked in business knows that if you leave it long enough, the cost of any technology drops, right? The cost of your mobile phone drops, the cost of televisions drop, the cost of everything drops, and the cost of the technology required to decarbonise will drop over time. I would say and that's a worry. That's a huge worry, because that's sometimes the methodology that an organisation can convince itself of. And I would say two things to that is, of course, the longer you wait and do nothing, the bigger the challenge, right? So actually then, somebody's raised the bar, and I've now got to learn how to jump even higher and I couldn't jump the other height, and yet now I've got to jump an even bigger height. So that's a challenge. And the second thing is, that if the end date stays the same, and that if we stick with 2050 staying the same, there's really now very strong agreement from many parties that actually the cost to decarbonise will just really escalate. So it can feel like the safe option is waiting, and that for me is a recipe for disaster. Because I think there is, as I say, as we walked away from COP26, I was left with a very strong feeling that everybody in the room accepted there was a problem and we needed to do something. If we now know we've got to do something but delay doing it, the cost of the capital might reduce, but the cost of the mitigation effort to overcome the damage that's already happened will have gotten out of all control. And we will then be rushing. And anybody who's delivered capital programs of projects knows the last thing you want to do is back end load it, because you just end up rushing to stuff, and then it never gets done effectively, never gets done properly, and it always costs significantly more than you thought. So I understand it's a real thought process. And in these times, you think, well, I could just sit here and wait for others. But if as a country we do that, then I think we're leaving that challenge to the next generation, and it doesn't feel fair. I mean, there is a positive concept side to this, Emily, which is also to know is whether you're dependent, whichever side of Brexit you stood on, right? Okay, one of the things is, that we now have, whether you like it or not, we have an opportunity to a global market, and we have an opportunity to be experts and sell to that global market. Perhaps decarbonisation and the efficient decarbonisation of our industries and buildings and heat could be our export to the rest of the world. But if we're going to do that, we need to be the experts, and to do that, you need to lead. So it could be an opportunity for UK PLC if we act bravely and quickly.
Fantastic. And I think there's a few kind of key points to take away from today's discussion, about how this is a journey that we all kind of are in together, and it is a nationwide issue. And, a matter of collaboration is going to be huge to deliver net zero and decarbonisation, of course. So I think we've now hit the 30-minute mark, so we're going to wrap things up. But thank you so much for joining us today, Carl, and joining us on the virtual stage. Thanks to everyone who watched with us, whether you're at home or at the event today in London. We have so much amazing content coming up, so make sure you stay tuned and stick around. But for now, that was Carl on the virtual stage.